Dissolved into Ash is the second full-length album from Dusk. This is a Green Bay, Wisconsin-based death doom metal band and an atmospheric doom metal band that had sparked up in the early '90s. Around the time, groups like My Dying Bride and Paradise Lost had sort of, and Cathedral and whatnot, had sort of invented this new form, this new extreme ideal. And these guys were thrashers. You could find back in their early discographies, they would all had all been involved in thrash metal bands or death thrash and that kind of thing. And they'd all switched over to this, and they were good at it. Actually, in fact, they were quite probably one of the more exemplar ideations of unique atmosphere in death doom metal early on, and they created a funereal form of it that really sidled well alongside the sound of groups like Evoken, Morgion, and Ceremonium to some degree, where they matched the intensity of death metal to some degree, very basic death metal overall, with the funereal, wide open spaces of this new type of doom metal. It wasn't exactly funeral doom metal, it wasn't exactly melodic death doom metal. This was something that was squarely death doom metal in its own way, and it was built upon doom metal riffs. Those early records, Dusk and Majestic Thou and Ruin, are incredible. Uh, they're hard to appreciate now because we have better production values abounding, and you have to realize that these records sounded as good as they do today back at the time, and they were not well distributed, they weren't very well known, and I think the first time I heard them, someone had told me it was a disembowelment record because it was named Dusk, and I think that one of the early disembowelment records that influenced this band was named Dusk. So I heard them kind of by accident back in the day on a CDR, the early 2000s or so, and was blown away by it. And I've been a huge fan of them ever since. So I was pretty excited to hear that they had returned some years ago, but really, they'd never necessarily left so much as they'd been doing other things. And we find that in their sort of offshoot band, Aphotic, they continued down that road and it didn't really go anywhere. And we found in posthumous releases, they'd moved towards a more gothic sound, which was of the time in the late '90s. And it was effective. It is not bad to return to. That late '97, '98 side of the band was closer to some of what they're doing now, which is chunkier death metal and a few gothic doom moments here and there. We'll cut into a song here to get a sense of what this record sounds like and whether or not they still sound like Dusk. So a huge part of what made this band who they were, frankly, it was kind of the unique production style of and the atmosphere of those first two releases. And part of that was not only the skill of the drummer, but the sound of the drums. And they've removed that from the equation by now. And now we're more focusing on these, what I would consider Godflesh influenced guitar riffs. And I know that seems like a little bit of a stretch, but if you understand the influence of Godflesh on heavier death metal in the late '90s and onward, and various other forms of metal, you understand what I mean when we get to some of these more dissonant walking paced riffs on this record. So it is related to gothic metal in some sense, but we do get chunkier, simpler grooves throughout this record that are rooted in doom metal, but also do a lot of mid-paced death metal along the way. And for me, some of this really stumbles throughout this record. It gets there, and it's fine in the way it is. The same way like a Serpentine Path record might be. You get kind of a 75% speed rather than half speed to these doom metal and death metal riffs, and it moves just a little bit too fast. It doesn't give a lot of room to breathe, and for me, that sort of a suffocating death doom metal sound can be interesting, but they really drag it out on this record for quite a lot of tracks, and it was either cut a track or let it breathe a bit more. And thankfully, there are some songs that get it exactly right. I think there's a couple on here that are really lasting in their effect, and some of them were easier to connect with than others. But there's still a stiffness, a sort of a less expressive side to the band that just isn't there anymore in terms of letting these riffs and pieces breathe and do their thing. And I think it's really just comes down to the atmosphere that they create. So, while I was happy with this record and I was pretty excited for it the first couple times through, the more I went through it, it's just an all right record. It's not one that's going to really add to that earlier legacy, but it's not going to embarrass it either. It'll work. I think these songs will work well with their past works in a live setting, and in that sense, the continuity will make sense. But for me, this was kind of just a high, a reasonably high recommendation, and not exactly. It wasn't necessarily a mind blowing record. It's just I'm glad to see this band is back, and I think this is a good form for them that shows they can still do it. So, depending on how attached you are to the classics and the early works, which are quite obscure, your results might vary. So go ahead and check that out for yourself this Friday. It is, and go ahead and check out my review likewise.